I never thought this day would come. I always believed our marriage was different, built on trust and love that could never be shattered. But now, sitting here, staring at the text messages on her old phone, I feel the ground collapsing beneath my feet. How long had this been sitting here, buried in the past, waiting to destroy everything we had built? It started innocently enough. I wasn't snooping, I would never do that. No, I was looking for some old photos she had told me about, something we could show our friends from when we first met. I found her old phone in the drawer of her nightstand, half buried under old birthday cards and random receipts. It had probably been years since she even touched it, so I didn't think twice about turning it on. I just wanted the photos. I didn't want to find this. The messages were from someone named Nick. The timestamps on them were from before we got married, but not long before. I scrolled through, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was there, in plain sight, emotional confessions, passionate exchanges, and worst of all, a plan to meet up. The words made me feel sick, each one a stab deeper into my chest. My wife, the woman I had built my entire life around, had betrayed me before we even stood at the altar. How could she have done this? And why hadn't she told me? I thought we shared everything. Every secret, every fear, every insecurity. But this? She had hidden this from me for years. I tossed the phone onto the bed, feeling my heart pound in my chest, each beat harder and more painful than the last. My breath came in shallow gasps as the anger rose inside me like a flood, threatening to drown every rational thought. I had to confront her. I couldn't just sit here, pretending like this didn't change everything. When she walked into the room, smiling like nothing had happened, like my entire world wasn't crashing down around me, I felt a wave of rage I didn't know I was capable of. "Do you know what I just found?" My voice came out colder than I expected, sharp and accusatory. She looked confused, her smile fading. "What are you talking about?" I grabbed the phone and threw it onto the bed between us. I found this." Her eyes flicked to the phone and widened in recognition. I watched her face drain of color as realization dawned on her. She knew what I had found. "John," she started, her voice trembling. But I wasn't ready to listen. "Not yet." "You lied to me?" I snapped, my fists clenched at my sides. "All these years you've been lying to me. How could you?" "It wasn't like that," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. But I didn't care about her tears. I cared about the truth she had kept from me. "Then what was it like?" I demanded. "Tell me, Sarah. Did you sleep with him? Did you cheat on me before we even got married? And then just what? Pretend it never happened." She wiped at her eyes, struggling to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. I stood there, my heart pounding, waiting for her to admit it. And then she did. "Yes," she breathed. "I did. But it was a mistake, John. It was one time and I regretted it the second it happened. I swear I never saw him again after that." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls of our home, the home we had built together, were closing in on me. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to hurt her the way she had hurt me. But all I could do was stand there, paralyzed by the weight of her confession. "A mistake," I echoed bitterly. "A mistake that you kept hidden for years. How many times did you look at me and think about him? How many times did you lie straight to my face?" "I didn't lie," she cried, her voice desperate. "I just didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you. I was ashamed. I knew it would break us if you found out, and I didn't want to lose you." "Well, congratulations," I spat, turning away from her. "You lost me anyway." I stormed out of the room, the sound of her sobbing behind me only fueling my anger. I needed space. I needed to think. Every instinct in me was screaming for revenge, for some way to make her feel the same crushing pain she had inflicted on me. But what would that accomplish? Would it make me feel better, or would it just drive us further apart? I found myself pacing in the living room, my mind racing. There was a part of me that still loved her, despite everything. We had years together, years of happiness, of memories that I didn't want to let go of. But how could I forgive her? How could I ever trust her again? My thoughts kept returning to one question. Should I forgive her or make her pay for what she did? The idea of revenge was seductive, a way to regain some of the control I felt like I had lost. I could have an affair of my own, show her exactly how it felt. Or I could walk away, leave her to live with the guilt and the knowledge that she had destroyed everything we had. But then what? Would that really make the pain go away? Would it undo the betrayal? And then there was the other part of me, the part that loved her, that wanted to believe in the life we had built together. If I forgave her, could we move past this? Could we rebuild the trust that had been shattered? I didn't know what to do. For the first time in my life, I was completely lost. The door to the bedroom creaked open, and she appeared in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "John, please," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I know I hurt you, and I'll do anything to make it right. Just don't give up on us. Please." I looked at her, standing there so broken, so full of regret, and I realized something. Whatever I chose, whether it was forgiveness or revenge, would define the rest of our lives. The silence between us was unbearable, thick with everything left unsaid. Her pleading eyes locked onto mine, but I couldn't bear to look at her for too long without the anger creeping back. I could see her regret. Hell, I could feel it, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain. Her words hung in the air, echoing in my mind. It was a mistake. A mistake? That word felt so small compared to the damage it had done. What she had done was no mistake. It was a choice. She chose him, even if just for a night. And now I had to choose what to do with that knowledge. I could hear my breath, slow and heavy, as the seconds ticked by. I wasn't the kind of man to act on impulse. But right now, every instinct screamed at me to walk out that door, leave her here with the weight of her betrayal. Maybe find someone else to dull the ache. But then what? "I don't know what to do, Sarah," I said, my voice raw, barely above a whisper. It was the most honest thing I could manage. "I don't know how to look at you and not see him. I don't know how to forget this." She stepped toward me, hesitant, like she was afraid I might recoil. And maybe I would have, but I was too exhausted to move. The emotional flood had drained me, left me hollow. She was close enough now that I could see the tremble in her hands. "You don't have to forgive me," she said softly, almost as if she were trying to comfort me. "Not right away. But please just don't leave. Not yet. Let's talk about this. Let me try to explain." "What's there to explain?" I cut her off, sharper than I intended. I could see her flinch, but I couldn't stop myself. "You cheated. You slept with someone else. That's all I need to know." Her breath hitched as more tears spilled down her cheeks. "John, please." She wiped at her face, frustrated with herself for crying. "It was before we were married. It was a mistake, one that I wish every day I could take back. I was scared of us back then, scared of how serious things were getting. And I messed up, but I didn't want to lose you, so I didn't tell you. Couldn't. I thought we could just move forward." Her words blurred together after that, her voice shaky and broken, but I was barely listening. My thoughts were miles away, running in circles around the same question. Can I forgive her? Could I really move past this, knowing that she had lied for years, that she had carried this secret while I believed we were building a life together without shadows? I thought I knew her. I thought I could trust her with everything. And now it felt like the foundation of our relationship had been built on quicksand. But part of me, the part one hated to admit existed, didn't want to walk away. Despite the hurt, despite the betrayal, there was a voice in the back of my mind, whispering that maybe this didn't have to be the end. I had loved her once. Hell, I still loved her. It was a twisted, painful love now, tangled with anger and distrust, but it was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. "Why didn't you tell me before we got married?" I asked, my voice hoarse. It was a question I hadn't fully realized I needed the answer to until now. She looked down at her hands, twisting them together as if she could wring the guilt out of them. "I didn't want to lose you," she said again, quieter this time. "I thought if you knew, you'd leave, and I couldn't bear that. So I buried it, and I tried to be the wife you deserved." The words should have softened me, But they didn't. Instead, they only made the betrayal feel deeper. She didn't want to lose me? But what about my right to know? My right to decide for myself if I wanted to stay with someone who had already betrayed me before we even said our vows? I let out a long breath, trying to release some of the anger burning a hole in my chest. You should have told me, I said, my voice flat. I deserved to know the truth. You should have trusted me with that, even if you thought it would hurt. I know, she whispered, barely audible. You're right. I should have told you. The silence stretched between us again, the weight of her admission pressing down on both of us. I could see the regret in her eyes, the guilt that was eating her alive. But that didn't change the fact that I was still standing in the wreckage of what I thought was a solid, unbreakable bond. You've been living with this for years, I said, shaking my head. Every time we celebrated an anniversary, every time we talked about our future, you were hiding this from me. She nodded slowly, biting her lip as more tears rolled down her cheeks. I know, and I hate myself for it. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman standing in front of me with the woman I thought I knew. She was fragile now, broken in a way I had never seen before. I always thought of her as strong, confident, someone who would never do something like this. But now I realized that maybe I had never fully understood her. Maybe I had missed the cracks beneath the surface. The anger in me was still there, simmering, but now there was something else. A weariness, a heaviness that made me feel like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I couldn't just snap my fingers and make a decision. I couldn't just walk away without knowing what that would mean for both of us. I need time, I said finally, the words dragging out of me like stones. I can't make a decision right now. I need to think. She nodded, her eyes red and swollen, but she didn't protest. Take all the time you need, she whispered. I'll be here, and no matter what you decide, I'll understand. I turned away from her and walked out of the room. I couldn't stay there, couldn't stand the sight of her crying, couldn't deal with the overwhelming emotions swirling inside me. I needed space. I needed to be alone to process everything. The door closed softly behind me as I left the house and walked into the cool evening air. The world outside felt almost cruelly normal, as if nothing had changed. But inside me, everything was different. Everything had shifted. I didn't know where I was going, but I started walking anyway, hoping that maybe, with enough distance, I could figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I don't know how long I walked. Could have been hours. The sun had set by the time I found myself at the edge of town, standing outside a bar that I hadn't been to in years. The neon sign flickered, casting a faint red glow over the cracked pavement. I knew what I was doing. I knew what kind of temptation I was flirting with just by being here. It wasn't the drinks that called to me. It was the idea of distraction. The idea of losing myself even just for a little while in someone else. Maybe it was revenge, or maybe it was just the aching need to feel something other than the suffocating pain that Sarah had left me with. But as I stood there, staring at the entrance, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting to see Sarah's name. But it wasn't her. It was Greg, my oldest friend. He had no idea what was going on. But somehow, it felt like he knew exactly when I needed someone. You busy tonight? The text read. I stared at the screen for a long moment, torn between walking into that bar and responding to Greg. Torn between the pull of revenge and the chance to do something else, something less destructive. Finally, I typed back, "No, you free." Within minutes, my phone buzzed again. "Let's grab a drink. Meet me at Joe's." Joe's was a dive bar on the other side of town, quieter than the one I was standing in front of. More likely to provide the kind of calm I needed, rather than the chaos that was brewing inside me. I turned away from the neon lights and started walking again. Maybe I wasn't ready to forgive Sarah. Maybe I wasn't even ready to decide what came next. But for tonight, I was going to choose something different. And for now, that was enough. When I walked into Joe's, the place looked exactly as I remembered. Dimly lit, with the familiar scent of stale beer and the low hum of conversation in the background. Greg was already there, sitting at the bar with a couple of empty stools next to him. He spotted me as soon as I came in and raised a hand in greeting. "About time," he grinned, though his eyes were full of concern. Greg had a way of reading people, and I knew he could see something was off. He'd probably noticed it the second I responded to his text. I sat down next to him, the weight of the last few hours still pressing down on me. Greg slid a beer across the counter without asking what I wanted. He knew me too well for that. I took it and stared at the glass for a few seconds, watching the condensation drip down the sides. My mind felt foggy, like I was underwater and couldn't quite surface. "So," Greg said after a moment, his voice casual but probing, "what's going on? You look like you've been through hell." I let out a long, slow breath, unsure of where to even start. The words were stuck in my throat, tangled in the mess of emotions I was still trying to make sense of. I wanted to say everything at once, but at the same time I didn't want to say anything at all. Finally, I just muttered, "It's Sarah." Greg raised an eyebrow and took a sip of his beer, waiting for me to continue. He wasn't the type to push, but I could feel the weight of his attention, steady and patient. She cheated on me," I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. I'd never said them out loud before, and hearing them was like ripping open the wound all over again. Greg's expression shifted instantly, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced by something sharper, more serious. "What?" His voice was low, but the anger was clear. "It was before we got married," I added quickly, not sure why I felt the need to explain it right away. Maybe because part of me wanted to defend her, even after everything. "It was years ago. I just found out tonight. She never told me." Greg let out a low whistle and shook his head. "Damn, man. That's brutal." I nodded, staring at the beer in front of me but not really seeing it. "Yeah." We sat in silence for a while, the noise of the bar fading into the background as my thoughts swirled in endless circles. I could feel Greg's eyes on me, but he didn't push. He just let the quiet settle between us, giving me space to say more if I wanted to. Eventually, I did. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, I love her. We've built a life together. But how am I supposed to get past this? How am I supposed to trust her again?" Greg leaned back, crossing his arms as he considered my words. "That's a tough one," he said after a moment. "I mean, I've known Sarah for as long as I've known you, and she's always seemed solid. But cheating, even if it was before you got married, that's a hard thing to forgive." "Yeah," I muttered, staring into my beer. "It is. And it's not just the cheating," Greg continued, his voice thoughtful. "It's the lying. She kept this from you for years. That's what would kill me." I nodded slowly. He was right, of course. The betrayal wasn't just the physical act. It was the years of silence, the deception that had been woven into the fabric of our entire relationship. How many moments had we shared where she looked at me, knowing what she had done, and chose not to tell me? "I thought we had something real," I said, my voice cracking a little as I spoke. "I thought I knew her. Now I don't know if I ever really did." Greg was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward, his tone more serious than I'd ever heard it. "Look, man, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I think you need to ask yourself a couple of things. First, do you think she's sorry? Really sorry? Because if she is, and if she's willing to work to earn your trust back, maybe it's not impossible to get past this." I looked up at him, the words hitting me harder than I expected. I hadn't let myself think that far ahead yet. I'd been so caught up in the shock and the anger that I hadn't even considered whether I could forgive her, or if I even wanted to. "And second," Greg went on, "can you forgive her? Because if you can't, then you're just going to be stuck in this cycle of resentment. It'll eat you alive." I took a long sip of my beer, trying to process what he was saying. Could I forgive her? Could I let go of the anger and the hurt long enough to rebuild what we had? And even if I could, would I ever really be able to trust her again? The questions were too big, too overwhelming, and I felt myself sinking under their weight. "Maybe I just need to get even," I muttered half to myself. The thought had been lingering in the back of my mind ever since I left the house. The idea of having an affair of my own, of making her feel the same pain she had caused me. It wasn't rational, and I knew it wouldn't fix anything, but the temptation was there, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Greg raised an eyebrow. Revenge cheating? You really think that's going to help? I shrugged, not sure if I believed it myself. I don't know. Maybe it'll make me feel better. Make things even. Greg shook his head, his expression skeptical. I don't think it works that way, man. You cheat on her and all you're going to do is add more damage. It won't fix what's broken between you two. It'll just make things worse. I knew he was right. Deep down, I knew that sinking to her level wouldn't solve anything. But that didn't make the urge go away. I wanted to hurt her, to make her feel what I was feeling, to somehow balance the scales. But at what cost? I let out a long sigh and ran a hand through my hair. I don't know, Greg. I don't know if I can look at her the same way ever again. Greg nodded, his expression softening. It's going to take time, man. A lot of time. And maybe, after everything, it's not even possible. But if you still love her, and if she's willing to fight for your marriage, then maybe it's worth trying. I stared at the bar, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Love, trust, betrayal, revenge, forgiveness. Each word felt like a tug in a different direction, pulling me apart piece by piece. I didn't have the answers, and I wasn't sure if I ever would. But Greg was right about one thing: it was going to take time. And maybe that was the only thing I could give myself right now. I finished my beer and set the empty glass on the bar, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on me. Thanks for listening, I said quietly, not quite able to meet Greg's eyes. Anytime, he replied, clapping me on the shoulder. You know I'm here for you, whatever you decide. I nodded, grateful for his presence but still feeling lost. I think I'm going to head out. I need to clear my head. Take care, man, Greg said as I stood up, his voice full of quiet support. I left the bar and stepped into the cool night air, feeling the chill seep into my skin. The streets were quiet, the world around me still and calm, but inside I felt anything but. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was going to do. But for now, I just walked, hoping that somehow, somewhere along the way, I'd find the answers I needed. The next few days passed in a blur, a haze of confusion and emotional exhaustion. I didn't go home that night after I left Joe's. Instead, I checked into a motel on the edge of town, needing space to think, needing distance from Sarah and the mess that now defined our marriage. I couldn't bring myself to talk to her, and every time she called or texted, I ignored it. I wasn't ready to face her yet. I wasn't ready to have that conversation, to figure out what came next. All I knew was that I needed time. The room was small and bare, just a bed and a TV that played static-filled channels I didn't care to watch. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to give me the solitude I needed to sort through the whirlwind of emotions inside me. I spent the days alternating between rage and sorrow, sometimes in the same breath. One moment I was furious at Sarah for betraying me, for keeping her secret for so long. The next, I was devastated, mourning the loss of the trust one thought we had. The future I had imagined with her seemed so far away now, out of reach. And then there was the guilt, the nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, I was overreacting. After all, it had happened before we were married. Couldn't that mean something? Was I really going to throw away everything we had built together because of one mistake, one moment of weakness that she had tried to bury? But every time I started to soften, the anger came roaring back, reminding me of the lies, the betrayal, the fact that she had looked me in the eye for years and kept this from me. The days at the motel blurred into each other, each one feeling like a rinse and repeat of the last. I'd wake up, stare at the ceiling, and wonder if today would be the day I'd find the clarity I needed. The answer never changed. I didn't have it in me yet. I was avoiding Sarah's calls. Every buzz of my phone felt like an electric shock, pulling me back to reality, and every message from her was a door I wasn't ready to open. I'd never imagined myself in this position, sitting alone in a dingy motel room with nothing but my thoughts and the sounds of the highway outside. The room smelled of stale air and cheap cleaning products, a far cry from the home I'd built with Sarah. A place that used to be filled with laughter, with memories. Now, it felt like those memories were tainted. The silence was deafening. Every passing car outside seemed to echo the turmoil inside me. I had come here to get distance from Sarah, but the distance hadn't made things clearer. If anything, it only made everything more muddled. I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. At some point, I'd have to face Sarah, face what had happened, and make a decision. Forgive or leave. Trust her again or move on. But every time I tried to think of which path to take, my mind just circled back to the same burning question. Why didn't she tell me? It was that betrayal, the secret she had kept for years, that haunted me. The fact that she had decided, somewhere along the way, that she would hide this from me. If she had told me from the beginning, maybe it would have been different. But she hadn't. She had chosen to lie. And that lie had grown, festered, and now it was threatening to destroy everything. On the third morning, I woke up with a decision gnawing at me. I couldn't hide here forever. I couldn't let the silence drag on between us, with me holed up in this motel, avoiding everything. I wasn't going to get answers by hiding, and I certainly wasn't going to heal. I had to talk to her. I stared at my phone for a long time before finally opening one of the messages she had sent. There were dozens of them by now, all variations of the same desperate plea. Please talk to me. Some were longer, spilling over with apologies and promises to explain everything, but I couldn't bring myself to read them fully. My heart wasn't ready for her words, her excuses, but it didn't matter now. I needed to go home. I needed to confront her, face to face. I drove back in a daze, the familiar streets rushing past in a blur. My stomach was in knots the entire time. What was I even going to say? What could she say to make this better? The thought of seeing her again, of being in the same room after everything, twisted something deep inside me. I didn't know if I could handle it, but I had no choice. I couldn't run anymore. When I finally pulled into our driveway, the house looked just as it always had. It was almost insulting how nothing on the outside had changed. Our front porch was the same. The flower pots she'd insisted on planting still lined the steps. The curtains in the living room window drawn. Everything seemed normal, but it wasn't. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the car door, trying to gather the strength to walk inside. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat like a countdown to something I didn't want to face. But I had to. I had to know where we stood. I opened the door and stepped inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. No TV, no music, nothing but the ticking of the clock on the wall. I called her name, my voice sounding foreign in the silence. A few seconds later, Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes red and puffy, her hair messy like she hadn't bothered with it. She was holding onto the railing like it was the only thing keeping her standing. "John," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. The relief in her eyes was immediate, but so was the fear. "You're home." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring up at her, unsure of what to feel. She took a few tentative steps down, like she was afraid of scaring me off, as if I might bolt back out the door at any second. "Maybe I would. I wasn't sure if you'd come back," she admitted, stopping halfway down the stairs. Her voice was trembling, but there was no more pretending, no fake smiles, no lies to cover up the truth. I'm so sorry, John. I'm sorry for everything." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell at her, to make her understand how deeply she'd hurt me. But all I could feel was an overwhelming sense of exhaustion, like the fight had drained out of me. "I need to know why, Sarah," I said finally, my voice low but steady. "I need to know why you kept this from me for so long. Why didn't you tell me before we got married? Why did you let me believe all of this?" She nodded, biting her lip as tears welled up in her eyes. "I should have told you," she whispered. "I know that now. I knew it even back then, but I was scared. I was scared that if you knew, you'd walk away. That I'd lose you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Of course, she was scared. But that fear didn't excuse the lie. It didn't excuse the years she had let this fester between us. A secret I hadn't even known existed. I deserved to know the truth. I said, my voice harder now. You should have given me the chance to decide for myself. Instead, you decided for me. She flinched at that, her hands twisting together as she fought to hold back the tears. I know, she said quietly. You're right. I should have told you. But I thought we could move past it, that it was just a mistake. I didn't want to lose you over something that happened before we even said our vows. But it did happen, Sarah. I shot back, my frustration bubbling to the surface. And you let me walk into this marriage thinking everything was perfect, thinking I could trust you completely. And now I don't even know if I can look at you without seeing him. The silence between us grew heavy, suffocating. She was crying openly now, her tears falling in silence. But I didn't know if I could comfort her. I didn't know if I wanted to. I love you, John, she said through her tears, her voice breaking. I love you so much, and I'll do anything to make this right. Please just don't give up on us. Not yet. I'll go to therapy, we'll go to counseling, whatever it takes. Just please, don't walk away. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that somehow, despite everything, we could rebuild what had been broken. But part of me wasn't sure if that was even possible. How do you rebuild trust after it's been shattered? How do you forgive someone who's kept a part of themselves hidden from you for so long? I don't know if I can do this, I said finally, my voice cracking under the pressure of it all. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw true, unfiltered fear in her eyes. The fear of losing me. The fear of everything coming undone. Please, she whispered, taking a step closer. Please give me a chance. Just one chance to make things right. I know I messed up. I know I should have told you. But I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with. Please, John, don't give up on us. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that it wasn't that simple, that this wasn't something she could just fix with words or promises. But the exhaustion weighed me down. I was tired of the anger, tired of the confusion, tired of feeling like my entire world had come crashing down. I need time, I said, stepping back from her. I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah. I don't know if I want to, but I need time to figure it out. She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Take as much time as you need, she whispered. I'll be here, and I'll wait for you, for as long as it takes. I turned and walked out of the house, the door closing softly behind me. The moment felt final, like something had shifted between us that could never be undone. But as I walked down the street, the weight of the decision I would have to make settled over me like a cloud. Forgiveness wasn't just a choice, it was a journey. One I wasn't sure I was ready to take. The sky was overcast as I walked away from the house, the gray clouds mirroring the fog inside my head. I didn't know where I was going, but that seemed to be the theme of my life lately, lost, directionless. Every step I took away from Sarah felt like I was getting further from something I'd once cherished but was no longer sure I could return to. The streets were quiet, with only the occasional car passing by. My feet carried me aimlessly, past familiar houses and old landmarks from our life together. I passed the coffee shop where we used to go on Saturday mornings, back when everything between us felt easy, uncomplicated. Felt like another lifetime ago now. I eventually found myself in a small park, one we used to visit when we first started dating. It had a little pond, benches overlooking the water, and tall trees that seemed to block out the rest of the world. It used to be our spot, a place where we could escape everything and just be us. I hadn't been here in years, but somehow my feet had brought me back. I sat down on one of the benches and stared out at the water, watching the ducks float lazily across the surface. It was peaceful, quiet, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. How had it all come to this? How had the life I thought I was building with Sarah turned into this tangled mess of betrayal, doubt, and heartbreak? I didn't know if I had the strength to forgive her, but I also didn't know if I had the strength to walk away. Every time I thought about leaving, the idea of our home, our life, being ripped apart was too much to bear. But staying meant living with the knowledge of what she had done, and I didn't know if I could live with that either. The thoughts swirled in my head, each one pulling me in a different direction, and the weight of it all felt like it was crushing me. After a while, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another message from Sarah, but it wasn't her this time. It was Greg. "How you holding up?" I stared at the message for a moment, unsure of how to respond. How was I holding up? I felt like I was in freefall, like the ground had been yanked out from under me, and I was still trying to figure out which way was up. "I don't know." I finally typed back. "I feel lost." His reply came almost immediately. "You need to talk? I'm around if you do." I hesitated for a moment, then typed, "Yeah, I could use a friend." We arranged to meet at a diner not far from the park. I got up and made my way over, feeling a little lighter knowing that at least I wouldn't have to carry this burden alone, at least for a while. When I walked into the diner, Greg was already there, sitting in a booth near the back. He looked up when he saw me and waved me over. There was a coffee cup in front of him, and he was stirring it absent-mindedly, his expression serious but patient. "Hey," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. "You look like shit." I gave a weak chuckle. "Feel like it too." He motioned to the waitress, who came over and poured me a cup of coffee without asking. Greg must have told her I'd need it. I stared at the steaming liquid, the smell of it familiar and comforting, even though I didn't have much of an appetite for anything right now. "So," Greg said after a moment, his voice soft, careful, "did you talk to her?" I nodded, my fingers curling around the warm cup. "Yeah, I went home earlier today. She was a mess, apologizing, saying all the things she thought I wanted to hear." "And how do you feel about that?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Part of me thinks she means it, you know? That she's really sorry and that she'd do anything to fix this. But then there's the other part of me, the part that keeps reminding me that she lied for years, that she kept this secret from me for our entire marriage." Greg nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "That's the hard part. It's not just about the affair. It's about the trust that got broken along with it. That's a tough thing to rebuild." "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't know if I can." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of my words hanging between us. I knew Greg wasn't the kind of guy to sugarcoat things or tell me what I wanted to hear. He'd tell me the truth, whether I liked it or not. "I get it, man," Greg said after a while. "It's easy for people to say, 'Oh, it happened before the marriage, so it doesn't count as much.' But that's not how it works. Still happened, and she still chose to hide it from you. That's what messes with your head, right?" I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. I keep thinking, what if she'd told me back then? Would I have married her anyway? Would I have been able to move past it? But she didn't give me that choice. She made it for me. Greg leaned back, crossing his arms as he considered my words. "You've got a right to be pissed. You've got a right to question everything. But at the end of the day, you've got to figure out if you can live with it. If you can forgive her." Forgiveness. That word felt like a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb. It wasn't just about saying the words. It was about actually letting go of the anger, the hurt. It was about rebuilding trust, and I didn't know if that was something we could do. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for that," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive her." Greg was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed. "Forgiveness isn't about strength, John. It's about choice. You have to choose whether you want to try. It's not easy, and it sure as hell doesn't happen overnight. But if you love her, if you think she's worth it, then you've got to decide if you're willing to do the work." The truth of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right, of course. It wasn't just about what Sarah had done. It was about what I was willing to do now. If I wanted to fight for our marriage, if I wanted to rebuild what had been broken, I had to make that choice. And if I wasn't willing, then I had to walk away. But walking away didn't feel right either. Despite everything, I still loved her. That love was messy and painful now, but it was still there, buried beneath the anger and the betrayal. And I hated that part of myself for still feeling it, for still wanting her even after everything. "I think I still love her," I said, the admission feeling like a confession of weakness. But I don't know if that's enough. Greg nodded slowly. Love's not always enough on its own, but it's a start. The question is, do you think she's worth fighting for? I didn't know how to answer that. Or maybe I did, but I wasn't ready to admit it. When I got back to the motel that night, the weight of the conversation with Greg sat heavy on my shoulders. I still didn't have any clear answers, but at least I wasn't alone in my confusion. Greg's words echoed in my mind. Is she worth fighting for? I lay on the stiff bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling, my thoughts a jumbled mess. I kept replaying everything over and over. The way Sarah had looked at me, broken and desperate, pleading for another chance. The years we'd spent together, the good times, the laughter, the love. And now this. I had spent so much time focusing on the betrayal, on the lie, that I hadn't let myself think about what I still had. Sarah hadn't cheated on me during our marriage. She hadn't continued the affair or lied to me about her feelings. She had made a terrible mistake before we said our vows, and then she had buried it, thinking it was the only way to keep me. It was a coward's choice, yes, but it wasn't the same as if she had been unfaithful the whole time. Could I forgive her? Could I rebuild the trust that had been shattered? I didn't know, but as I lay there, the one thing I couldn't shake was that part of me still wanted to try. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity that had been absent since I discovered Sarah's betrayal. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive her, but I knew I wasn't ready to walk away either. I needed to talk to her again, face to face. No more running. No more hiding. When I got to the house, it felt like I was stepping into a minefield. Every memory, every glance at the familiar furniture, brought back flashes of the life we had built together. It was a life that now felt fragile, like it could crumble at any moment. Sarah was sitting on the couch when I walked in. She looked up at me, her face a mixture of hope and fear. The tension in the air was palpable. "John?" she began, but I held up my hand to stop her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. I sat down across from her, the distance between us feeling both vast and too close at the same time. She nodded, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I know. I've been waiting for you to be ready." I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you," I admitted, the words heavy. "But I'm not ready to give up on us either." Her eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, I saw hope flicker in them. "I'll do anything, John," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll go to therapy, we'll go to counseling, whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "If we're going to move forward, it's going to take time, and it's going to be hard. You lied to me for years, and that's not something I can just forget." "I know," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know I hurt you, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. I swear." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "It's not going to be easy, Sarah, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you the way I did before. But I still love you. I hate that I do, but I do. And that's why I'm willing to try." She let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you, John." The room fell silent again, the weight of the conversation settling between us. I didn't know what the future held, or if we'd ever truly be able to move past this. But for the first time in days, I felt like there was a chance. A small one, maybe, but a chance nonetheless. I stood up, the exhaustion of the past few days still heavy on my shoulders. "I'm going to stay at the motel for a while longer," I said. "I need space, but I'll come back. We'll figure this out. Together." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "Take all the time you need," she whispered. "I'll be here." I left the house again, but this time, it didn't feel like I was running away. It felt like I was taking the first step toward something new, something different. Maybe we could rebuild. Maybe we couldn't. But at least I was willing to try. The days that followed were slow, cautious steps toward something resembling normalcy. I stayed at the motel, but I visited the house every day. We didn't dive into deep conversations or try to solve everything all at once. We took it one day at a time. Some days were better than others. Some days, I'd leave the house feeling like maybe we had a shot. Other days, the weight of the betrayal would crush me all over again, and I'd have to remind myself why I was doing this. Sarah kept her promise. She found a therapist and we started going to counseling together. The sessions were hard. We had to confront things neither of us wanted to face. The hurt, the lies, the fear. But slowly, bit by bit, we started to make progress. It wasn't perfect. Far from it. There were days when I doubted whether we'd ever truly be able to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But there were also moments, small, fleeting moments, when I saw glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with. The woman I still loved, even though it hurt to admit it. Forgiveness wasn't something that happened overnight. It wasn't something that came easily. But I was learning that it didn't have to. It was a process, a choice I had to make every day. And some days I wasn't sure if I could make it, but I kept trying. Months passed, and slowly, the wounds started to heal. They didn't disappear, and I knew they never truly would. But they became scars, reminders of what we had been through, and what we were still trying to overcome. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the past would resurface and I'd feel the sting of betrayal all over again. But there were also moments of hope, moments when I could see a future where we were stronger because of what we had survived. I didn't know what the future held for us. I didn't know if we'd ever fully rebuild what had been broken. But we were still here, still trying, still fighting. And for now, that was enough. As the months crept by, it became clear that our life had found a delicate rhythm. The motel room, once a temporary retreat, gradually faded from my daily routine as I found myself spending more nights at home. Each night I returned felt like a small victory, even if it wasn't always comfortable. The house didn't feel quite the same. There was still tension, the kind that settled into the cracks of every conversation, every silence. But Sarah and I were navigating it. We were trying. Counseling helped, though sometimes it felt like pulling teeth. Our therapist, Linda, was patient but firm. She pushed us to be honest even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. Sarah talked about the fear that had driven her to hide the affair, how she thought that keeping it buried would somehow protect us. I admitted how hard it was to reconcile the woman I loved with the one who had betrayed me. One session, in particular, stuck with me. Trust doesn't come back just because someone says they're sorry, Linda had said, her calm eyes moving between Sarah and me. Trust has to be earned back slowly, and it won't happen unless both of you are willing to take that step every single day. I could tell Sarah was doing everything she could to earn back that trust. She was more open with me than she'd ever been before. No more secrets, no more late nights at work without explanation. She made sure I knew where she was at all times, even when I didn't ask. At first, it felt suffocating, this new transparency. It was as if we were both trapped in a cage made of the very trust we were trying to rebuild. But over time, it started to feel less like a punishment and more like an understanding. She was showing me that she wanted to change, and I was learning to believe her, inch by inch. But the scars were still there, and they had a way of reopening when I least expected it. One night, as we sat in the living room watching a show, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. Something in me tensed immediately. The paranoia that had built up inside me, the fear that she was still hiding something, rushed to the surface before I could stop it. She must have sensed my reaction because she quickly grabbed her phone and turned it toward me. "It's just Jess," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine with a kind of cautious vulnerability. I glanced at the screen and saw that it was, indeed, her friend Jess, sending some random message about a weekend trip they were planning. Nothing suspicious, nothing to worry about, but I still felt that flicker of doubt, that gnawing feeling that something could be hidden just out of sight. I hated it. I hated how the affair had rewired my brain, making me question things that shouldn't be questioned. Sarah's expression softened as she set her phone down. "John," she said quietly, "I know it's going to take time. I don't expect you to just stop feeling like this overnight. I don't expect you to just trust me again. But I'm here. I'm not hiding anything anymore." "I know," I said, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the weight of everything settle over me again. I'm trying. I really am. It's just hard. She reached over, her hand resting on mine. I know it is, she whispered. I'm trying too. We sat like that for a while, the silence between us no longer suffocating, but still heavy. I realized then that the road to healing wasn't just about the big breakthroughs or the dramatic conversations. It was about these small, everyday moments. The moments where we chose to stay, to fight through the discomfort, to remind ourselves why we were still trying. But the question that lingered in the back of my mind, the one I couldn't shake, was, would it ever be enough? Despite the progress we were making, I knew there would come a time when our fragile new balance would be tested. And sure enough, that test came sooner than I expected. It was a Friday evening, and Sarah had just gotten home from work. She was unusually quiet, more distant than she had been in months. I noticed it right away, the way her eyes didn't quite meet mine when she walked into the kitchen, the way she hesitated before speaking. "Everything okay?" I asked, leaning against the counter as she poured herself a glass of water. She didn't answer immediately, which only made my stomach twist with unease. Finally, she set the glass down and turned to face me. "Nick reached out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I froze. Nick, the name that had set all of this into motion. The man she had been with before we were married. The man whose name was still a dark stain on our past. "What?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She nodded, looking down at the floor as if she couldn't bear to see my reaction. "It was nothing inappropriate. He sent me a message on LinkedIn. It's been years, and I guess he just wanted to catch up or something." I didn't respond. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Just hearing his name again was enough to bring all the old feelings rushing back. Anger, jealousy, betrayal. My mind raced with questions, with doubts. Why had he reached out? What did he want? And more importantly, why was Sarah telling me this now? She must have seen the turmoil on my face because she stepped forward, her hands outstretched in a calming gesture. "John, I'm telling you because I want to be honest with you." I didn't respond to him. I didn't engage. I thought you deserved to know. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was just a blip, that it didn't mean anything. But my mind wouldn't stop spiraling. Nick was a name that represented everything I had been trying to move past. And now, here he was, trying to weasel his way back into our lives. "Why is he reaching out now?" I asked, my voice cold. "After all these years?" "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "I really don't. But I swear to you, John, I have no interest in talking to him. I'm not hiding anything from you. I thought you needed to know." The room felt like it was closing in on me. Every instinct in me wanted to storm out, to get as far away from this conversation as possible. But I knew I couldn't do that. If I left now, if I ran away from this, it would undo everything we had been working toward. "I believe you didn't respond," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level. "But why didn't you block him right away? Why didn't you shut it down the second he reached out?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked down again, ashamed. I don't know. I guess I just froze. I was shocked to see his name pop up after all these years. But you're right. I should have blocked him immediately, and I will, right now. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she logged into LinkedIn and showed me the screen. Sure enough, there was the message from Nick, short, innocuous, but loaded with implications. She clicked on his profile and blocked him without hesitation. "There," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "He's gone. He won't be able to contact me again." I watched her, my heart still pounding in my chest, but the anger that had flared up inside me was slowly starting to dissipate. She was doing everything right. She had told me about the message. She had blocked him without hesitation. She was trying. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. That didn't mean it didn't bring back all the old wounds we had been working so hard to heal. "I don't like this," I said finally, my voice quieter now. "I don't like that he reached out to you. I don't like that he's even thinking about you after all these years." "I don't like it either," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I promise you, John, I don't care about him. I only care about us." the sincerity in her voice, the way she looked at me with so much vulnerability, it broke something inside me. I could see how hard this was for her too. She was trying so hard to fix what she had broken, and I had to acknowledge that. "I know," I said softly. "I know you're trying." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I love you, John. I don't want to lose you." For the first time in a long time, I felt a small crack in the wall of anger and distrust I had built around myself. I didn't say anything, but I stepped forward and pulled her into my arms. She melted against me, her body shaking with silent sobs. I held her tightly, feeling the weight of everything we had been through, everything we were still trying to overcome. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't some grand resolution, but it was a step forward. And right now, that was all we could ask for. After the Nick incident, things between Sarah and me hit another rough patch, but it wasn't as bad as before. The old wounds had been reopened, but they weren't festering like they used to. Sarah had done everything right. She'd been honest with me. She'd blocked him. She'd shown me that she was committed to rebuilding our relationship, and that mattered. But it didn't mean the doubts disappeared overnight. Trust, as Linda had said, wasn't something that magically returned. It was something we had to work for every day. And some days it was harder than others. We kept going to counseling, and slowly, bit by bit, we started to find our way back to each other. There were moments, small, fleeting moments, where I could see glimpses of what we used to have. The easy laughter, the quiet comfort of being in each other's presence. Those moments were rare, but they were becoming more frequent. And each one felt like a tiny victory. But there were still setbacks. There were still nights when I couldn't sleep, when my mind would wander back to those text messages I had found, back to the betrayal that had started all of this. There were still times when I'd catch myself watching Sarah out of the corner of my eye, wondering if I'd ever truly be able to trust her again. But through it all, we kept trying. We didn't give up. Months passed, and the weight of what had happened started to lift. It wasn't gone, not by any means, but it wasn't as heavy as it used to be. The scar was there, but it wasn't as raw. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, Sarah turned to me and said something that caught me off guard. "You know," she said quietly, "I was afraid you'd leave me. When I first told you about the affair, I was sure you'd walk out that door and never come back." I looked at her, surprised by the sudden vulnerability in her voice. "I thought about it," I admitted, my own voice soft. "A lot, but I didn't." "Why not?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, thinking about everything we had been through, everything we had fought for. "Because I love you, and I guess I wasn't ready to give up on that. Not yet." She smiled, a sad but genuine smile, and reached for my hand. "I'm glad you didn't." I squeezed her hand in return, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But we were still here, still trying, still fighting for each other. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. As more time passed, I began to realize that healing wasn't about forgetting. I would never fully forget what Sarah had done. The affair and the years of secrecy would always be a part of our story, woven into the fabric of our relationship like a scar that would never completely fade. But what I was learning, slowly and painfully, was that scars didn't have to define us. They could just be reminders of what we had survived, of how far we'd come. Months turned into a year, and life began to feel more normal, or at least a new version of normal. The worst of the storm had passed, and while there were still days when the sky was cloudy, we weren't drowning anymore. Sarah and I were finding our way step by step. We still went to counseling, though not as often. We still had hard conversations, though not as sharp or painful as before. And we still had moments where the trust between us felt fragile, but we were building it back, brick by brick. One night, about a year after everything came to light, I found myself lying in bed, watching Sarah as she slept beside me. It was late, the house was quiet, and in the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. She had changed, of course she had. We both had. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I could see a future where we didn't just survive this. We could thrive. Not because we had ignored the past, but because we had faced it together. We had chosen to stay, to fight, even when it would have been easier to walk away. As I lay there, I thought about all the times I had been on the edge of leaving. The motel nights, the moments of doubt, the temptation to just walk out the door and start fresh somewhere else. But I hadn't. And now, as I looked at Sarah, I realized why. It wasn't because I was afraid of being alone, or because I was too weak to leave. It was because, deep down, I had always believed in us. Even when it was hard, even when it hurt, some part of me had known that what we had was worth fighting for. And now, after everything, I could see the proof of that in the small, quiet moments we shared. The laughter that had returned, the comfort of being in each other's presence, the trust that was slowly coming back. I had forgiven her. Not completely, not in the way that erased all the pain, but enough to keep moving forward. Enough to choose love over resentment, healing over anger. Sarah stirred beside me, her hand reaching out to find mine. Even in her sleep, she sought out that connection, that reassurance that I was still there. And I was still here, still by her side, still choosing her every day. I squeezed her hand gently and felt a sense of peace settle over me. The future wasn't certain. Life never was. But we had made it through the worst, and now we had a chance to rebuild. Together. As I closed my eyes, I thought back to something Linda had said during one of our early counseling sessions. Something that hadn't fully clicked until now. Forgiveness isn't a destination. It's a journey. One you choose to take every day. I hadn't understood it then, but now I did. Forgiveness wasn't about wiping the slate clean. It was about choosing, every day, to move forward. To let go of the hurt, little by little. To trust again, one moment at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to take that journey. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I did know this. I loved Sarah, and she loved me. That love wasn't perfect, but it was real. It had been tested, broken, and bruised, but it was still there, still worth fighting for. As I drifted off to sleep, with Sarah's hand in mine, I knew we were finally on the road to something better, something new. It wasn't the life we had before, but maybe that was okay. Maybe this new life, built on the ashes of the past, could be even stronger. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.